If you don't even know who your enemy is, then how are you going to defeat it? Welcome back, guys. It is Bible Scribe. Thank you for joining me. This is the third video in our six-part series on Satan. The who, the what, the why. What is this thing we call Satan? And maybe we can clear up some of the disagreements about it. But this video, we will be going through, and I'll bring it up on the screen. We'll be going through the names Thanatos, Abaddon, and then Samael and Lilith, which are kind of similar. We'll see a relationship there. But we've already gone through, if you remember our overview, we established there are all these names and terms that, that may or may not refer to the same being we're talking about when we say the word Satan. And so that's what most of these videos are about, is clearing up the confusion with those names. So these names are important for reasons that you will see in this video, and prepare yourselves because the next video is going to we're going to dive into the name Satan and all the references of that name, and it's going to be a doozy. So prepare yourself. But this video, we're going through Thanatos, Abaddon, and Samael and Lilith. So let's go ahead and get started. First, we're going to start with Thanatos. What do the ancient writings say about Thanatos? Who is he? Because he's mentioned in Revelation 20. Here in the Bible, verse 14, and death, which is Thanatos in the Greek, and hell, or Hades, were cast into the lake of fire. This is the second death. And in fact, throughout the New Testament, the word Thanatos is used a lot for death. And that had significant meaning to the Greeks. So it's not just a paltry term. It had a lot of baggage that came with it. So I went to the Greek sources. I went back and I found a bunch of sources, a great website. I'll put a link in the description for you. But these different writings, and you probably remember seeing these same writings with Hades when we did that in the previous video. But these are from BC. These are from 800 years BC, which is Homer's Odyssey you see there. Euripides in the 5th century BC, Aristophanes 4th century BC, and Virgil is the 1st century before Christ. And so all these are old writings. And at the time of Christ, when they wrote about like Thanatos or Hades, the people knew exactly who they're talking about. And I say who intentionally because they were deities to the Greeks. Some were worshipped. They would bring sacrifices to them at their temples. So they knew exactly who these people were. So Thanatos here in these sources, we see he was responsible for transporting men to Hades at or after their death. So as soon as a human would die, it was Thanatos' responsibility to either him himself or with his cohorts of angels, demons, would collect the soul of the dead human and take him down to Hades, where we learned last time in our last video was the abode of the dead for humans, and was ruled over or watched over by another entity named Hades. And that was all through Greek literature as well, including Christian literature. So he was also said to be an unfeeling and apathetic being with no pity on the humans whose souls he was supposed to collect. So he did this job with no mercy, no pity, and that was the view of Thanatos' attitudes towards his job. And it said Thanatos had wings. This is repeated over and over in these writings, so wings or not wings, just an interesting fact there. Now, searching for Abaddon was the next name on the list. He is in the Bible in one place, and so we're going to talk about in the Bible what it says, but he is known as the angel of death. Abaddon, Moriel is an old name of his, ancient name. Actually, his his angelic name was Muriel. He's the king of all mankind. According to some of the sources we're going to read, he's the angel of the abyss. And Revelation 9 is the only place in the Bible that mentions Abaddon. It says in verse 11, and they, the locusts, and these are the locusts like demons from the releasing of the seals, I believe, in Revelation, And they, the locusts, had a king over them, which is the angel of the bottomless pit, whose name in the Hebrew tongue is Abaddon, but in the Greek tongue his name is Apollyon. So the king, the angel of the bottomless pit, that's the abyss. That's why that was mentioned up above. This angel actually has some history. We're going to see that in a second. I found that in a different writing. So there's this writing, and it's attributed to Josephus, or at least was attributed to Josephus first. But then some more modern scholars came along and said they thought it might be Hippolytus. I still attribute it to Josephus. It doesn't matter really. The age of the writing is the same. And so it is a very authoritative, interesting writing about Abaddon himself. And you can look that up on the internet. I'll probably try to give you a link. But my points here: the powers shall be under thy control, and thou shalt send them after every soul. They shall strike terror into souls and shall change their forms. This is what God in this writing is saying to this angel who becomes Abaddon. That the powers would be under his control, and he would send them after souls. And not one of them, meaning mankind, would yield up his spirit until he hath seen thee. So there was you need to read this discourse on Abaddon. It's incredible writing, but it is the whole story of how Abaddon became a power of the underworld. And Abaddon didn't do anything wrong. There's a story behind that. If I don't have it in the slides, I'll tell it to you briefly. But he became this kind of minister of death. And when humans were going to die, when they passed, they would see his face. And this was declared by God that this would happen. It says in this third point, the powers would be under your control, and you would send them after every soul. So that to me struck a chord with the Thanatos information we just read. Not that I'm not saying they are the same, but it is interesting that this angel also got that attribute, like going after the souls of mankind. So it is similar in a way to that job regarding Thanatos in the Greek myths. Then shall they strike terror into souls and shall change their forms. I think that that's regarding the forms of the souls of humankind once they pass. Not exactly sure, but a very interesting statement there. So before we go on, I will tell you quickly on Abaddon. The story is in paraphrase form that Muriel, which was, I said, his original angel name, he had gone before God at creation, and he was one of the angels whom God, when he was making man, said, "Go and fetch me a piece of earth that I might make man from it." Because as you remember in Genesis, Adam was formed of the dust of the earth. And this was... So he had sent out these angels, and Muriel being one of them. Well, the other angels, in some regard, didn't come back with the earth that God had requested, but Muriel did. And once man had sinned, because Muriel was the one that had obeyed, he made him king, quote unquote, over mankind. As you saw in our first slide, king of all mankind, that was the phrase used in the discourse of Abaddon for him. So it was said that he, again, his face would appear before all men at death, that he had some job in regards to their souls after death. So this was the story that is told in this discourse of Abaddon about how Abaddon, Muriel became Abaddon and got this position in the underworld. So Samael and Lilith. Now, I say in here in this title, the aspects of Satan, and you're going to see why that is as we go into this information. This is a very interesting kind of probe into these different names. So in the Bible, there's no mention of Sammael, but there is a mention of Lilith. And that's in Isaiah chapter 34, verse 14. The wild beasts of the desert shall also meet with the wild beasts of the island, and the satyr shall cry to his fellow. Lilith, in Hebrew, also shall rest there, and find for herself a place of rest. Now, this is part of Isaiah's prophecies, and this is just mentioned in amongst these lists of beasts and animals, and so it's hard to know for sure. That the interpreters, when they came to this verse, they had a really hard time. And if you have any normal modern translation, you'll see this word Lilith is not spelled out Lilith. It's night creature or owl, because they didn't know what to do with it. Really is the truth. But it is the word Lilith, and it's the same word from the other Akkadian literature and stuff that was used for their deity, and so that's where this name comes from. The Great Isaiah Scroll and the Dead Sea Scrolls also contains reference to Lilith. In the fragment 1Q1 ISA, that's how they nomenclate their the fragments and scrolls that were found in the Qumran caves. In 34:14, so this is a copy of Isaiah. It's this copy of this same verse, and it renders the creature as plural. Just as a FYI, it's Liliot, which is more than one. But anyway, it's the same word, but it is interesting that it is plural there. Now, Samael, I'm just going to go through these points because there's a lot of reference to these beings, Lilith and Samael, in tandem, and they are in a lot of sources that are more, I want to say, medieval. That's where most of the information comes, so I don't like that. That's too late in the game for me. It's really way too late in the game for me. But I'm going to read through at least what I found, because a lot of people, especially Satanists and witches and Luciferians, they attribute Samael and Lilith to Satan in some regard, and they worship them. And so that's why this is on this list. The medieval scholar Nachmanides in 1194 to 1270 identified the Hebrew text as also referring to a demon, and identified this with Azazel with Samael. Azazel with Samael. So just to show that there's a connection here between Samael and Azazel in the book of Enoch, which is another one of the names we're going to go into in our next video, because it is connected with Satan. Then the second point, Samael is an archangel in Talmudic and post-Talmudic lore, the Talmud being the writings of the Jews, post-Christian rabbinic writings, a figure who is the accuser, Ha-Satan, seducer, and a destroyer, Mashit. And so Samael is mentioned in the Talmud in multiple places as part of Jewish lore, essentially. Third point there, Samael was first mentioned during the Second Temple period and immediately after its destruction. He is the dominant evil figure in the book of Baruch, as he plants the tree of knowledge. Thereupon he is banished by God, and to take revenge he tempts Adam into sin. So they do, the Talmud, the Jewish lore tradition, connects Samael to the one who tempted Adam to sin. All right, so it even gives him credit, as this is saying in the book of Baruch, with planting the tree of knowledge of good and evil, which Adam there then sinned by eating from, and Eve. So it's interesting, they connect Samael directly to Azazel and Satan, or the serpent in the garden, in the Jewish Talmud. So just note that. I came across this, so I had to include Samael in this study. So I wanted to give you kind of a summary. I went through a lot of information on Samael and Lilith, but this is the summary of the things I found. I didn't bring some of those sources forward. Like I told you, they're kind of modern. They're kind of like medieval and post-medieval sources. They're Kabbalah, they're Zohar. So I don't really use those sources as definitive, authoritative information. But that's where a lot of it comes from. Most of the information on Lilith in the first point here comes from the Zohar and later texts. So we're talking about, 500 AD and following. all the way up to, you know, the 1500s. So it's very late texts compared to everything else we've studied. Samael has a direct Judaic connection with Satan. As I told you, the Talmud does connect Samael with Satan directly. Point 3, the connection with Lilith and Satan seems to be there, but it's hard to pin down. There's a serpent connection with both. Lilith is a female deity. I believe it's Akkadian literature and or Babylonian, where she is mentioned and worshipped. Some depictions of her have been, you know, and they're old, and some of them have been debunked. So it's really hard to pin down. That's why I said that here. But it's, you know, she's shown as a female with very large breasts. So there's sexuality involved there. Then there's also the image of an owl always shown with her. So that is a connective tissue with Lilith. But again, it's just hard to pin down. There's also always mentioned with Lilith a serpent type thing. Like either there's a serpent shown in the picture with her, or she's described as a serpent or serpent-like. But so that's the connection. It's very loose and it's very hard to lock. And so I just wanted to bring it forward because, you know, like I had said, Satanists have a connection there. They see Samael and Lilith as something connected to Satan. In the next point, Satan always was seen as an androgynous angelic being with both male and female characteristics. And so that, to me, is interesting because in the next point, Samael, Lilith were seen as a male and female aspect of the same god or entity, like Moloch and Ishtar in Babylonian. And so it's like, after all the stuff I read about it, you have to ask yourself, were Samael and Lilith really two parts of the same? And maybe they were a representation, possibly, of the Satan, which the Satan being was always represented as androgynous, like half woman, half male, half female. And so, you know, when just those two things rang like parallel, but that's the only thing. Other than the Talmudic literature that references Samael and connects that to the serpent in the garden and Satan, there's just not a lot of other connections in real sources, other than Kabbalah, which I don't... Kabbalah is all over the place, and it combines so much Babylonian, Pharisaical, and magic, plus the Judaistic beliefs. It's just, to me, it is just an esoteric religion that is a way for Jews to practice magic. That's what I believe that the Kabbalah and the Zohar were. Anyway, that's a whole nother video. But my last point here on Lilith and Samael is that Lilith's legend comes from a 10th century writing in AD. 10th century AD writing. Now think about that. That's after year 1000. And it is suspect because of its very late date. Nothing older than that has been found about Lilith's legend. So all the information on Lilith is older than 1000 AD. So that again is to me why I can't pin this one down. It seems to be related. Samael and Lilith both have relationships to Satan, but it's hard to really verify any of it because all the literature is very late. So, oh, there we go. Sorry. So that is this one. It's a little shorter. We just had those 3 to go through. And again, we're kind of building relationships between these terms and beings and Satan, so that in the end, in the final video, you got to stick with it, because in the final video, we're going to bring all those things together. All the connectivity is going to make sense. We will explain it. But coming in part 4, the next video is Satan, Tartarus, Baal, and Beliar. And so we will go into each of those names. That is going to be probably the longest video because of Satan being included there. That's going to have the most literature we'll have to go through and look at different points and connectivities between that and other terms or entities, and that's going to be a wild ride. So join me for the next video. Thank you again for sticking with me through this one, and give me a little like and subscribe if you can, and I will see you next time. Thank you. Bye.